welcome to another edition of the Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, I examine issues of interest to Guyanese at home and in the diaspora. And in keeping with our theme during August, that is to say, to observe August as African Guyanese History Month, mainly because of the occurrence of independence and the Essequibo Revolt on the Damon and the Demerara Revolt on the East Coast and other factors, we have chosen to designate August as African Guyanese History Month. And in keeping with that theme, we will look today at the question of Creole cuisine. Well, we have to eat every day, and many of us are attached to Creole food, what we call Creole food, despite the pressure of fast foods from North America and other countries. When we speak of Creole, it's sometimes difficult to pin down a meaning. Technically, it means that you were actually born in the country. I mean, when, of course, people came from overseas, Europeans and so on, they refer to people who were born in the colony as Creoles. But for some reason or the other, over a period of history, the term Creole was attached mostly to Africans who were born in, people of African descent born in the colony. And I don't think many Europeans saw themselves as Creoles. And I don't know if any other ethnic groups in Guyana see themselves as Creoles. In any event, when we speak of Creole cuisine, we speak of the way food is prepared, in a way which is typical of Creoles, of African Guyanese people. And these meals tend to contain ingredients such as breadfruit, coconut, pigeon peas, plantains, and tubers or root vegetables like cassava, dasheen, edo, tanya, yam, sweet potato, and so on. These are well-known root vegetables or tubers. And there's also a tendency to use salted meat, beef or pork, or even fish, salt fish, and a lot of peppers, of course. So Creole cuisine has certain distinctive ingredients and a certain distinctive way of preparing it. And over the years, literally over 200 years, some of that cuisine has been virtually unchanged and has passed down through generations. Several things have changed, of course, but the essential names and flavors of some of them have remained for a long period of time, particularly in rural Guyana. When we speak of Creole cuisine, those of us who grew up in the countryside and belong to African Guyanese families would know that Sundays particularly was a special day in which you had soup, a Sunday soup. There was nothing, no changing that in some households. And the soup was very heavy, with vegetables particularly. And every emancipation, households made a special effort, and at Christmas time as well. So sometimes you may not eat a certain type of food for the entire year, but at Christmas you had to have pepper pot and ginger beer. These were some of the staples on those two festivities, emancipation and Christmas. And fortunately, some people have even started to mount competitions. So there was competition for making pepper pot or other traditional foods at these times. In terms of the actual foods, well, there are some variations, and there are a lot of variations in spelling, but many of them still retain traditional, authentic three names. And I can recall that when President Akufo-Addo visited Guyana, he was treated to some of these foods which are still common in Guyana, but which he was familiar with in Ghana. One of them, of course, is fufu. spelled Fu, not FOO, but FU. And this is made from pounded plantain. And my mother had a huge mortar in the kitchen made of green heart and a long pestle, which enabled her to stand up and pound the plantain. I haven't seen many of those. I think many housewives now would choose to use a blender or some other machine. Uh, I don't want to comment on what the fufu tastes like, but certainly the, the product that came out of a pounded, by being pounded in a mortar was quite unique. Then there's kanki, which some people call konki, which is made from cornmeal and other. It's a form of treat, it's a form of sweet, cooked in banana leaves. Um, then there's what is called kokonte, which people call kongote. Again, as I pointed out in another program, there's no letter C in the Tree language. So it is spelled Kokont, Kokanti, that is the correct pronunciation, which Guyanese pronounces Kongote, which is a form of porridge normally given to children, made from the flour of pounded plantains, dried plantains, pounded. And then there's kuku, Ku, which again, many people in the Caribbean spell Coo. It's spelled Ku. And this is made from cornmeal and okra. And so on. It's more popular in Barbados and the islands, St. Vincent and other islands, than it is in Guyana. But many older Guyanese would be familiar with kuku, um, especially if they're descendants of Barbadian migrants. And then there's the ever popular metemg. Metemg, what can we call metemg? Is it a soup? It is really a soup-like dish with ground provisions, and these ground provisions could be cassava, dasheen, edutanya, yam, and sweet potato, and so on. And this metemg is normally cooked in coconut milk, and people would add bits of meat, small amounts of salt beef, and very frequently served with saltfish. Sometimes the saltfish can be cooked in the beef, um, to, and maybe salt beef or pigtails. I think people look down on pigtails now, particularly the many Muslim families. Wouldn't like to see a pigtail emerging out of the metemg. And then the queen of them all, pepper pot. And no Christmas dish is or no Christmas lunch is complete without pepper pot. And this is made from cashew, which is of course borrowed from the indigenous people, and some form of meat. And some people prefer oxtail or cow heel, or some people use the meat of pigs. And then, of course, there's sauce, which is more normally made from pork, some pickled pork, some form of pickling. So these are some of the traditional foods that we find in our Creole cuisine. And of course, it's accompanied, that cuisine is accompanied, as the saying, washed down with beverages like mabi. Again, this is a Caribbean drink made from the bark of the carob tree. It's really spelled M-A-B-I, but again, it has been refined to be pronounced as Morbi, but it's M-A-B-I. Nothing wrong with calling it Mabi. And of course, the sorrel and ginger beer. And again, I don't think many households in Guyana would be without ginger beer or sorrel, again at Christmas time. And for some reason, they're not available throughout the year. And there is now a variety of squeezed fruit juices. In many villages, up to recent times in the backlands or back dams had lots of fruit trees, tamarind, sorrel, and mango, and every one of them could produce some form of juice or drink. And the more ambitious would, of course, produce some wines, you know. So cuisine was not just the meal, the solid meal that we had, but it could also be accompanied by beverages. In addition to that, there is a variety of bush medicine. And nowadays in Western society, it is amazing that many things which people scorn, some people never go to Border Street to buy bush, but you now find many more elegant families, I suppose, buying things which are made from bush. Um, and we are all indebted to Bill Rogers, who in 1929 or thereabouts produced this song. It wasn't called Kaiso then, but it was a song. It was between Kaiso and Calypso, but it's a chanto of some sort called the Weed Song. And I mean, just listening to the names of those weeds now, although some of them are not politically correct, it's astonishing. And it is probably the best catalog of Guyanese weeds, because you would be surprised to know that people in the islands, when they come to Guyana, they come to Georgetown, they find themselves in Border Street going to some stall to buy weeds to carry back to the Caribbean islands. Cassava muma, physic nut, stinking toe, man piaba, woman piaba, granny backbone, Job steers, Jumbi basil, devil dua, Chinese mint, Suriname bitters, Kuli bitters, Portuguese bomba, Yoruba leaf, Congo lana, French toyo, and then down to one that is called Puss in Boots. I don't think many Guyanese children growing up would be familiar with more than one or two of those names. But this is all part of Guyana cuisine, Guyana's Creole cuisine, because some of us, when we get ill, we'd find one of these bush medicines and we'd get better. And many people swear by bush medicines. Unfortunately, sometimes they take it a little too far and they spurn Western science, sometimes to the detriment. But cuisine is not just the food; it's also the beverages, and it's also these medicines, which make you feel good. They make you feel good. They cure the body, and of course, they're organic to some extent. And we produce beverages also: cherry drink and ginger root, golden apple drinks. Some of them really, really, when you drink, chilled golden apple juice or tamarind juice or mango juice or Mabi juice, some of them, of course, have been canned or bottled by other countries. Unfortunately, Guyana has made much headway. Luckily, the queen of the Pomeroon, coconut water, is available in bottled form, and more Guyanese are choosing to buy bottled coconut water um, rather than stop at a street corner and put a coconut to the head. Maybe it's insanitary. And nowadays with Facebook, you might find yourself on some YouTube or something drinking coconut water at the street corner. In any event, all of these beverages are part of the Creole cuisine in the broadest sense. Now, food is essential to human survival, of course. And there are lots of sayings about food in almost every culture. And the one saying which is supposed to be of West African origin is that there's no God like your stomach, and we must make sacrifices to it every day. I don't mean to be to offend any Christian people, but people have to eat every day, and food is certainly not a god, but it's certainly essential. And every culture, every subculture is identified by its distinctive cuisine. And food tells you the story of how society adapted to its environment. Admittedly, these days, the sheer avalanche of fast foods from North America, and if you see how these foods are produced, candies and biscuits and so on, it's really difficult for small village producers to compete with them. And uh, there is a change taking place from the traditional handmade, domestic household production, which is bound to be in small quantities. And it's so easy for people to go into the supermarket and buy, 6 packets of this, or a larger volume of that, other commodity. So traditional cuisine is under threat from the mega producers of developed countries. Um, and it is not a question of the quality of the food that we have here. It's also particularly a question of the sheer convenience. I mean, few housewives now would get up in the morning and try to make mabi or ginger beer when a child has to go to school, and it's easy to go and buy a bottle of or a can of some other beverage. Some of the traditional cuisine is being smothered or overtaken by mass production. So we could see here that even though that process is inevitable and sometimes irreversible, there are lots of foods which are still extremely popular. For example, bake. Of course, bake is not baked at all. Bake is made from imported white flour, and it is lightly fried, definitely not baked, and typically it is served at breakfast time. And some people like to start the day with saltfish and bake. Um, then, of course, there's black cake, uh, and again, in typical Guyanese fashion, I'm not sure if it's popular in the rest of the Caribbean. It normally has to have a good dose of rum. And of course, it's made of fruit and a lot of brown sugar. Typically, it is eaten at Christmas time. And then, of course, black pudding. This is very upsetting to some people. It is a sausage, a boiled sausage, made usually with highly seasoned boiled rice and blood. It's a blood pudding, and other ingredients, of course. There's cassava pone, a sweet baked dessert made from grated cassava, coconut, and other condiments. And there's cocoa rice, which is presumably every culture that have some form of cocoa rice. Certainly in the Caribbean, we have a cocoa rice. It's a one pot dish, and it's supposed for workmen going to work. They can carry cocoa rice, and they've got everything in it: rice, peas, meat, all cooked up with coconut milk. And Edo soup. Well, Edo soup is very frequently not only made with Edo, it's made with all the other tubers. Um, you know, you might find cassava and plantain and dashin and so on, tanya in the Edo soup. People hardly use that variety now. Even so, in the market, many traditional housewives are really shocked. I can't say surprised at the prices of some of these locally produced ground provisions, locally grown ground provisions. And of course, cook-up is accompanied by some form of meat. And usually, the rice and other ingredients are cooked up in coconut milk and onions and other ingredients. Then, of course, my favorite, met MG. Again, as in most Creole foods, people turn to the tubers, root vegetables, cassava, dasheen, and those sweet potatoes, tanias, and yams. But um, to some extent, it's accompanied by fufu again. Fufu is very difficult to make. I mean, I can't imagine how housewives, 100 or 50 years ago would have been making fufu because it's laborious. And maybe for that reason, it is no longer produced in much quantity. But it is also served with dumplings made of imported wheat flour. And people can, prepare metem with, coconut milk, served with saltfish. And of course, pepper pot made from kasri, which is of indigenous origin. Of course, there's probably more kasri being produced in non-indigenous communities now. But of course, the cost of kasri has skyrocketed, and we don't know where that will go. But it is an important sauce, which everybody knows the value of kasrip as a preservative. That you can have a pepper pot going for several weeks or months or even longer, and of course people can add beef or pork. So what are we going to do about the Creole cuisine? Is it in jeopardy? At, is it likely to be to disappear from our tables? Is it likely to be eliminated completely as a form of food presentation in Guyana? Um, Creole cuisine has actually sustained the bulk of the African Guyanese for over 200 years. Why is this so? Its main ingredients were easily available in the villages. They are farm fresh, and many of the households grew the ingredients themselves, root vegetables. They were organic, and that is, they did not use, chemical fertilizers or insecticides. They were healthy and they were wholesome. They were satisfying. They were tasty. People longed for it, and it could be some of it, could be preserved for long periods of time in days without refrigeration. And how do we make sure that in years to come, our children and grandchildren could enjoy this Creole cuisine that we enjoyed when we were growing up in Guyana, rural Guyana? To start with, I feel that we have to take Creole cuisine seriously. It is not a sideshow, it is something central to food. It's a food that people like. And it means that people must be trained. The days when a mother or a housewife would bring up her daughters or sons to produce food in this way are more likely over now because children go to school from an early age. They don't stay home and learn these skills. And maybe a good thing to incorporate the training in these culinary crafts into schooling, just as boys can do woodwork or girls can do woodwork or learn music, or they can learn to produce Creole foods in their home economic classes. And again, this would help to keep Creole cuisine alive. Secondly, the technology has changed, and you cannot find now, or you cannot expect housewives to be standing in the kitchen in front of a wood fire or a coal pot to produce food. Technology now requires that the mortar and the pestle. I grew up in a house with mortar and pestle, and I don't expect to go in a modern household and see mortar and pestle. People will use different types of electric mixers and blenders, and food production has got to be made more convenient. So we have to, instead of trying to use the utensils that were used by our grandparents, we now have to adapt modern technology to produce the type of Creole cuisine that we find delectable and convenient for people who have to go off to office or go off to school or the workplace all day and maybe just come back in the evening. So the days of coming home for lunch are over, and the child or the office worker has to be able to take something convenient uh, to his workplace or to school. So there needs to be some form of transformation or transition. Um, there must be improved methods in order to compete with the fast food markets. And um, this is important that we cannot continue to produce small amounts in a laborious manner, when of course it's cheaper and more convenient sometimes to go to buy a food on the street. Uh, there needs to be large scale production to satisfy a growing market. I remember many years ago an attempt was made to can pepper pot. Unfortunately, that initiative collapsed. But there's no reason why so many things being canned, we cannot produce canned pepper pot. So wherever you go in the world, you can carry some pepper pot, open it and warm it up, and taste like home. We also need to improve farming at village level in Guyana. That is to say, the farmers themselves must generate a sufficient quantity of the uh, commodities that we need as ingredients. Again, there is a heavy emphasis on root vegetables. Um, Cassava planting, well, planting not root vegetable, cassava, tanias, yams, edos, dashi, and so on. And some of the villages were built on old estates with mud dams, and you really cannot extract a lot of produce out of those mud dams. And you need farm to market roads so that people can bring their produce from the back dams onto the markets or to be sold in the supermarkets in the towns and the city. And also, we need to transition away from roadside vendors. Many people would have stopped or have stopped in the past, maybe to buy some coconut water or to maybe buy a cook-up. But now people want sanitary surroundings and safe surroundings as well. And it is difficult for people, I'm not saying it's a matter of elegance, but it's difficult for people to be expected to stand up in a queue outside Stabrook Market or Bowden Market trying to get a plate of cocoa pie. They don't know where the plate was washed. There's no running water inside. And people are concerned about their health, especially in this era of coronavirus and other communicable diseases. And Creole food has got to transition from roadside vendor stalls to sanitary facilities. And we've seen it. There are several Creole shops in Guyana. Of course, we know the most famous at the edge of Tiger Bay, but many other places boast of serving genuine Creole foods, and people go there particular days of the week to get their soups or to get their pepper pot or they cook up and other Creole foods. The question is, my friends, that Creole cuisine has become a staple in many homes, and it started off as a necessity because that is all they had, ground provisions and maybe a few small pieces of meat, not much. But it was a necessity, not an option. So people had to eat it because that was all there was to eat. And over 200 years, people relied on Creole cuisine. Now it is a matter of choice, and I suppose old timers would want to have a taste of pepper pot or metem or cook up every now and then. But Creole cuisine is unique, and if you've grown up eating Creole food, there's there's nostalgia, but perpetual longing to have more of it. And although by and large it has been smothered by foreign fast food, it is still very popular, and perhaps it should be retained and perhaps increased and augmented, um, so that other generations could enjoy it. Uh, there's a saying in Africa, in West Africa, a fallen branch cannot bear fruit. And if the branches of the economy that produce these vegetables and ground provisions collapses, there will be no ingredients for Creole cuisine. Um, it has been sustained over the generations by traditional market days, and I'm glad to see that some villages are resuming and resorting to market days. And it means that we have to maintain village farms, because if the village farms falter, this unique cuisine that we've come to love and appreciate and rely on could collapse. The health benefits of organic food and authentic cuisine, however, should not be understated. Um, Creole food generally is good food, and it can contribute to a good life for all Guyanese. Thank you. Enjoy your Creole cuisine. God bless you.
Let us cooperate for the young. Let us cooperate for our land. Let us resolve to fight together. See we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must do